Of course, what you want to know is how does it play in virtual reality in 1.57. I still maintain that Pimax is the best way to play virtual trucking in ATS and ETS2. Now in this example we're using the Pimax Super 57 ppd optical engine, and as you can see guys, this is absolutely sweetabix. This is absolutely fantastic. We're back, we're in the virtual truck, and you know what that means. This is the new and updated Pimax VR guide for American Truck Simulator, and everything here also applies to Euro Truck Simulator 2. Now I've been driving these games for years in VR, and now that we're on version 1.57, things have never looked better. And as you saw from my introduction, yes, you can get your game looking exactly like that. If you enjoy guides like this, hit that like button, bash subscribe, and let's get buckled up, because I'm about to show you some brand new methods to transform your VR trucking experience to the next level.
Play it on Pimax.
Drop it. Drop it. Drop it.
Before we jump in, a huge thank you to Pimax for partnering with the channel. If you're thinking of grabbing a Pimax Crystal Light or a Pimax Super, you can get a fantastic discount code using my code NLSIMGaming. Scan the QR code on screen or check the links below. I've also added a Pimax buyer's guide in the description to help you understand the current offers. Using the code supports my channel and helps me bring you more guides just like this one. I've broken everything down into 3 easy steps so you can get running quickly with zero confusion. First, I'll show you how to launch a game in VR using the updated techniques for version 1.57, and with these methods I was able to achieve over 80 FPS even with a large number of modifications installed. Performance will vary depending on your PC of course, and I'll show you my full hardware specs later in the video. I'll also include optimization tips for lower end systems so that everyone can benefit. Next we'll go through the exact Pimax play settings I use, and I'll share my custom configuration file that you can download, and this will save you time to help you avoid manual editing. I'll also show you the correct custom launch options, plus several quick PC tweaks that can give you noticeable performance boosts. Finally, we'll dive into the in-game graphical settings you need to use to get the best balance of performance and visual quality. And by the end of this, your game will look crisp, run smoothly and be far more immersive, especially on the Pimax Super and the Crystal Light. The first thing you're going to need is a copy of American Truck Simulator or Euro Truck Simulator 2. Both of these games work in exactly the same way, and the configuration file will work exactly the same for both games. First of all, we're going to be using American Truck Simulator in this example. We're clicking on American Truck Simulator in your Steam library. On the right hand side of the screen you will see that there is a cog icon which is labelled as Manage. You then click on the cog icon and then Properties. It will then bring up a general page which is just here. We're going to be looking at some of these features and functionalities in here a bit later on in the guide, but the first thing we need to do is actually install the game. To do this we need to click on the Betas tab which is on the left hand side. Once we click on the Betas tab, we need to then go to the Beta Participation option, which is just up here, and if we click on the tab, you will see that there are various options available for us to select from here. We are selecting the Oculus plus OpenVR plus OpenXR runtime, which is labelled here, and once we have that downloaded and installed, you will then see that the selected version will change up here on the left hand side. Next up, what we need to then do is once the game has downloaded the beta participation file, we then need to go into our file explorer, and then on the left hand side you will see there is a tab labeled as documents. Under the documents tab you then need to then locate the American Truck Simulator game, which you will see. Double click into that and you will then see there will be a configuration file that has appeared, and we then need to go and make some amendments to that file. By double clicking on the configuration file, it will ask you what application you want to use to open it with. You will need to select Notepad or Notepad+. Once you are within the configuration file, you will see there is lots of Prism 3D configuration data within here. Now, Prism 3D is the game engine used to render American Truck Simulator. There's lots of information in here and things that you really don't need to be bothered about at this stage. I've actually made things very, very simple for you by actually creating a custom configuration file, which is downloadable from the video description, or if you click on there, you will be able to copy the values of this and then paste it into your existing configuration file, and then you can then simply click on File and Save, and then that's all you need to do. However, there are a couple of values in here that I just need to discuss with you in a bit more detail. The first line we need to look at is the buffer page size. To explain this in a simple form, this is the amount of RAM allocation that's provided to the game in order to increase the stack overflow size or the storage size, which is especially very helpful for modifications as the game operates on a very old game engine, which is Prism 3D. Over the last number of years, the game has obviously expanded significantly, and despite developers trying to optimize the game effectively, there are significant memory leaks within the game. This is set to 80, which would be a sufficient amount for any user with 32 gigabytes of RAM or above. I would recommend setting this at 80 as the highest value if you have 32 gigabytes. However, if you have 16 gigabytes of RAM, you may need to reduce this to 50. The second setting that we'll be looking at is the manual stereo buffer scale. This will increase scaling based upon setting through this option rather than actually increasing the setting of scaling within the game. For example, in game we'll be using 100%, and in Pimax Play we'll also be using 100%, but we'll be altering the actual in-game scaling using this sliding scale. So 1.3 will be the equivalent of an in-game scaling set at 300%, and we will then adapt this based upon what our actual GPU is able to handle. So for in this example, I've achieved very good methods using the Pimax Super Optical Engine 57ppd and going essentially up to a variable of 1.5, which would be the equivalent of an in-game scaling method of 400%, and it looks absolutely fantastic. I'm actually putting some actual in-game through the lens footage on screen now, so you can actually see in the top right hand corner to see how this effect would look within the actual game itself. To begin with, I would recommend setting this option at 1.2 and then essentially going back into the game and then running the game and seeing how it looks and performs within your game itself. We would then move on to a higher buffer scale setting of 1.3, as you can see in the example here, and this would be the equivalent of an in-game scaling setting of 300%. We can then move on to higher settings if your GPU is capable of handling that. The other benefit of using this method, it will move the BIOS from a CPU bound to GPU, which is obviously preferable and will deliver a better in-game and smoother experience. We're now going to be taking a look at the Pimax Play settings. Go into Pimax Play, and as you can see here, we're using the Pimax Super. This is the 57ppd optical engine in this instance. We then need to click on the device settings. Once you have clicked on device settings, it will then open this window. In this example, you will see we're using the optical engine 57ppd. However, as mentioned, this works exactly the same method in the 50ppd, the Pimax Crystal Light, and also the Pimax Ultrawide as well. However, on the Pimax 50ppd and the Ultrawide, you will have slightly less performance in terms of FPS due to the higher amount of field of view rendered. On the left-hand side, you will see device. If we are in device, you can scroll first of all down to 90 Hz on the Pimax Super. On the Pimax Crystal Light, I would recommend setting this to 120 Hz. If we then scroll down to the screen timeout settings, ensure that you have 5 minutes ticked, and this will stop the headset going into sleep mode. On the brightness scale here, we have it set to 95, which I find works well in most games. And then scrolling further down, we need to make sure that all other options are disabled. First of all, eye tracking. We don't need to use eye tracking in American Truck Simulator or Euro Truck Simulator 2. We also need to then scroll down further and ensure that All the other options are disabled. We have a manual IPD setting here, which you can see here, and this is a function only on the actual Pimax Super. On the Crystal Light, you will need to set your IPD manually. Under the Games tab, as you can see here, we have field of view set to normal. There is a new function in the new Pimax player where we can actually adjust the actual horizontal field of view, but we are leaving this on normal in this example. Under image quality, we can then see that we have it set to high. To see what the actual percentage is, we click on customize, and high is at 100% or 1.00. We can obviously adjust this based upon our preference, but I would recommend leaving this at 1.00 or 100%, and I'll explain why when we get into the actual in-game settings. Click back on high to set it back to where it was. On GPU upscaling and sharpness, even though these are fantastic features and work well in most games, there is no necessity to set these to enabled in this particular example. Under the fixed foveated rendering, we need to have that disabled. So we need to have quad views disabled by unticking this box. If we were to tick this box, we could then choose an option within here, but we're leaving all this functionality disabled. All the other functionality under the actual Games tab needs to also be set to disabled. Everything including hidden area mask. Under General, we need to have the actual OpenXR runtime set to Steam VR. I will show you how to do that in a moment. You will confirm that that is actually correct by seeing that this box would enable us to change it back to the Pimax OpenXR method. You may find this counterintuitive, but it actually does work better in Steam VR, and this was a recent finding actually in 1.56. Under the Advanced tab, there's nothing we need to change here. I would recommend disabling Activate Chaperone because it's not required. Chaperone adds a virtual boundary around you if you were playing, for example, games such as Half-Life Alyx where you may bump into objects. As we were playing ATS or ETS2, likely with a keyboard and mouse, or alternatively with a steering wheel, which is the most preferred and normal method, we obviously don't require this to be active. If all of our settings are correct, you'll see underneath here where it states currently settings, which I presume should say current settings. Fixed foveated rendering should be off. Smart smoothing should be off. And smart smoothing, just to give you a bit of information about that, is almost like a DLSS type feature that basically doesn't work very well, unfortunately, in most games, so keep that to off. And the 90 Hz mode would be correct for the Pimax Super optical engines. However, on the Pimax Crystal Light, I would recommend running it at 120 Hz. I mentioned that we needed to change the actual OpenXR render method from Pimax Player XR over to Steam XR mode. In order to do this, we need to launch Pimax Player. Once launched, we then need to open up Steam VR, which can be accessed through the Steam menu. And then we'll see the icon appear on screen, as you can see just here. We then need to click on the three lines in the top left-hand corner, and then we then need to open up settings. Once we're in the Steam VR settings, you can probably hear the twittering of birds in the background, which is just the standard background noise of the Steam VR settings. We have two options at the bottom. First of all, we have an option to hide and show advanced settings. We need to click on the show advanced settings, and this catches many users out who get Pimax devices. Steam VR unfortunately sets by automatic default the render resolution to 150%. If we actually click off automatic and go on to custom, you'll see that the actual resolution per eye is actually set to 150%. Of course, this is going to be incredibly demanding on most games. It will make most games essentially just fall to pieces. We need to reduce that down to the default setting of 100%, and we then need to keep it on custom. If we move further down to the left hand side, the next option we need to look at is the OpenXR option. You can see here that the current OpenXR runtime is set to Steam VR. If we were to enable Pimax to be the OpenXR runtime by clicking the option within Pimax Player to set Pimax Player as the OpenXR runtime, this would change to Pimax XR in this option here. Now I've set it to Steam VR. If it is set to Pimax XR, you need to select the option to change it to Steam VR. It will then ask for administrator rights to do so, and then that is the correct method of doing so, and that's what we need to utilize within this particular game. The next settings we'll be looking at are within the NVIDIA control panel if you have an NVIDIA GPU. To launch this, right-click on the NVIDIA icon within the tray on your desktop and then select Control Panel. The Control Panel window will open. On the left-hand side, there is an option for Manage 3D Settings. There are a couple of settings under here that we need to then change. The first one is the Power Management mode, and that should then be set to Prefer Maximum Performance. And then the other option is the actual shader cache size. And under this one, I would recommend you set it to unlimited, providing you have enough space on your primary drive where the actual control panel is installed. I've set it to unlimited here, but 100 gigabytes is also a preferred level of storage space available for the actual buffer scaling or shader cache. And then basically once you have that selected, you can then simply select apply, which will appear at the bottom. I have those options selected already, so I don't need to make those changes. There are no other changes we need to make in here, but by improving or increasing the shader cache size, that will enable textures to load in more effectively and enable an overall smoother experience within the game. In this section, we're going to be looking at increasing the virtual memory size so we can allocate more memory to be available for utilization within American Truck Simulator or Euro Truck Simulator 2 in virtual reality. To bring the menu up, you need to right click on the start menu and then select system. Once you are within system, you will then see that this screen will then appear. Under advanced system settings, you'll then see a system properties box that will pop up once selected, and then we need to select advanced. A performance options window will then open. We then need to select advanced, and we need to change the virtual memory, which is essentially the paging file area on the hard drive which Windows uses as if it were RAM. We then need to click on change, and then we need to locate the actual drive where our game is installed to. You will see here there is an option underneath for system managed size, and you'll see that the minimum recommended is 16 megabytes and the recommended amount is 6978 megabytes. We are going to then click on custom size. You can see I've already changed this to an allocation of 36 gigabytes. However, on my system, I have 48 gigabytes of RAM available, and I've actually set it to 36 gigabytes, so there's no necessity to set it in excess of this. If you have 16 gigabytes available, you need to change it to a division of half of that. I'm not going to set it again because you can see it's already set, but these are the variables, as you can see, that I've utilized in this particular area. We're now going to have a quick checklist of what we've done already. So we've already amended some PC optimization tweaks. So we've set the NVIDIA control panel settings. We've amended the virtual paging size on our hard drive or SSD. And we've also set the in-game configuration file correctly by adding the values in from the downloadable configuration file, which you'll see in the video description. Within the video description, you'll also see an additional setting which is called Launch Options 1.57. The launch options are OpenXR, which is a method of launch we'll use to actually launch the game itself. We're allocating a pool size of memory, as you can see here. We're allocating a system resource size, which is set to 32, hence 32 gigabytes of the actual RAM that we're utilizing. We're changing the buffer size. We're also removing the introduction from the actual game as well. So when the actual game loads, you won't see the introduction anymore. It will just go directly into the main menu. We've also set an unlimited log for any error logging, and we've also set the render method to DirectX 11. What we then need to do is we need to then right click and copy, or we need to highlight and copy this configuration launch option. We then need to go back into Steam, and we need to then go back to the manage icon on the right hand side. When we click on properties, you'll see that the launch option window will appear under general, and under this advanced launch option menu just here, you can see that we have simply copied and pasted those values into there. These values will then become the actual advanced launch options for the game. OpenXR will actually launch the game, ensure that the minus symbol is in front of every command, otherwise that the launch options will not work. So finally, we'll be looking at the in-game graphical settings before we can finally launch into the game. Now, this is the most crucial part. We need to obviously pay attention to the settings within here. First of all, in the full screen mode option, this is normally ticked. I'd recommend that you actually disable this by removing the tick, and that will put the actual on-screen display into a windowed mode rather than having it consuming the whole screen space. In brightness, if you click on setup, it will then make a new menu appear, which is different for 1.57. I would recommend you have this set to 50% because it will be extremely bright in the head-mounted display if you have it set to any higher. Once we've confirmed that, it takes us back into the other menu again. The refresh rate for the Pimax Super, I would recommend you have this set to 100 Hz, which is just slightly over the 90 Hz resolution that we are using. And then on the Pimax Crystal Light, remember we'll be using 120 Hz mode on that. You can then set that to 119 Hz if you are using a PCL. VSync needs to be disabled because it's not appropriate or applicable to the actual VR settings. FPS limit, I've set it to 101 on both the background and on the actual limit, as in the in-game limit. Under the image quality settings here, On scaling, I have this set to 100%, and you can see a representation of it on the right hand side of the screen just here. But bear in mind that we're actually changing the scaling method using the in-game configuration commands. And I mentioned already that you should start with 1.2, which would be a representation of in-game scaling of around 200%, and you can then increase that depending on your GPU capability or to your liking. Anti-aliasing, moving on to this one, we have SMAA and TAA enabled. Now temporal anti-aliasing, previously we've been using the Snowy Moon TAA modification, the V10. That's no longer necessary, I'm pleased to say, because STS have made some improvements to temporal anti-aliasing, and you're no longer going to be getting that shimmering or glistening effect. You can still use Snowy Moon if you wish, and there is an example in my previous guide on how to utilize that if you wish to do so. Under the TAA tuning, I would recommend using adaptive clarity, and I have the TAA luma sharpening set to 1.7, which I tend to find is a nice balance. Texture quality I have set to high, and anisotropic filtering I have set to 16 multiplier. Normal maps, as you can see on the right hand side of the screen just here, adds the additional geometric detail to both pavements, roads and other objects and improves the appearance. I would recommend you have that enabled. Reflection scaling, so this is essentially the actual render of the reflection scaling within games, so the actual reflectivity of objects. I tend to find 100% works really nicely on this and is obviously less of a burden on the actual overall game performance. Reflection detail, again, I have set to high. Mirror quality, I prefer to have this set to high, but you can also utilize medium if you're having some performance impacts. And also on the actual mirror resolution, I have this set to medium. I don't tend to find a great difference having this between medium and high. Mirror distance, I have this set to high again, and once again I tend to find that it looks very nice and works very well. Shadow quality I have set to ultra. If you don't have it set to ultra, then you tend to have a very noticeable aliasing effect or a jagged effect on all the shadows, which does break immersion within the actual game. Far shadows, however, and interior shadows I have disabled because I don't tend to find it makes a noticeable difference. Screen space ambient occlusion, you need to set this to disabled because this does have a significant impact on performance within the game. The light visibility ranges I would recommend having set to high. The traffic headlights, again, I would recommend having enabled. Secondary vehicle lights to enabled. And then in the post-processing, the depth of field I tend to find works well. If not, you tend to have a lot of pop-in the actual game, so I'd recommend having that enabled. Sun shafts, for me personally, I think it adds a really nice visual effect. There is quite a significant performance impact from this. Once again, it's something that you may wish to have enabled or disabled. I will in this instance see it say as enabled. Vegetation detail, I would definitely recommend having set to high because it just has a moderate impact on performance, but does add a lot of the visual impacts within the actual game itself. Again, the same with grass density. I prefer to have this set to high, especially with some of the modifications I utilize with grass, as you'll see in the gameplay section, which we'll be looking at next. Weather quality, which is set to ultra. Again, I do tend to find this is something that is a visual impact immersion breaker if you do have this set to any lower. So I tend to have the weather quality set to high, especially when utilizing with Weather 3.4, which is one modification I would certainly recommend for ATS in VR. And also if you are using Project Next Gen as well, which is another paid modification, which is obviously available as well. Pedestrians, I tend to find is something that I don't really have enabled because I don't tend to find the pedestrians look very real in the game. I tend to leave that disabled. Once you're happy with everything, click on apply, and then we can then move into the actual in-game and we can then show you some gameplay footage. So what you want to know is, of course, how does it play in virtual reality in 1.57 on the Pimax Super or the Pimax Crystal Light. And I've just got to say, guys, look around at this. It's absolutely incredible. This is the best version of American Truck Simulator in the years that I've been playing this game in virtual reality that I've ever experienced. Now in this example, using the Pimax Super 57 ppd optical engine, it also plays fantastically on the Pimax Super 50 ppd and the ultra wide as well. I've tried all three, and of course, as always, the Pimax Crystal Light. The Pimax Crystal Light was actually the foundation of how I started with the Truck Simulator guides on ATS and ETS2, and I actually produced the first Pimax guides for Pimax, which is around a year ago now. but I'm pleased to say that it just keeps getting better. This game is like a fine wine. And also, the other thing that keeps getting better as well are my guides, because in this particular guide, what we're getting is around 80 FPS in this particular example, and I'll show you on screen the performance as well we're getting on the Pimax Super 57 ppd. But just look at the absolutely incredible detail. These modifications that the workshop modders are doing is just absolutely incredible. So as you can see, the sun visor in front in this incredible Freightliner Cascadia. We've got absolutely amazing detail in this. Now I can even read with the Pimax Super 57 ppd, because this is retina level. I can read every single detail on us, and everything is absolutely crystal clear. Everything in this cabin is absolutely amazing, and just looking around and looking up, as you can see, it's just amazing. Absolutely fantastic. Even the Cascadia floor mats there look almost real. Now what we're going to do, we're going to have a short drive around, and we're going to discuss the changes that have been made in this. Now I've got to also mention that there are a number of changes modification wise to the norm that I would actually use. First of all, I've got to mention Snowy Moon. So Snowy Moon is a big and popular modification at the moment, and a lot of people ask, can you use Snowy Moon in virtual reality? Previously I would actually use Snowy Moon as in the temporal anti-aliasing modification, because it was a necessity in virtual reality. There was always almost like a flickering or a glistening to a lot of the textures if you weren't using the Snowy Moon temporal anti-aliasing, which is a V10.
Go straight on.
Unfortunately, the lighting improvements doesn't work in virtual reality. I know that there have been some revisions to it recently, but it just has such a large impact on the FPS that it just makes the game essentially unplayable. And that's even running an RTX 5090 as I'm using in this example here as well. I'm not saying that you will need to have a 5090 to run American Truck Simulator with a large number of modifications like you're seeing in this example here. Of course it helps, but it will play really nicely actually on also the actual Pimax Crystal Lights, and I've been benchmarking that as well, and it will also play really nicely also on the 50 ppd and also the ultra wide as well. Now I should have been in the other lane because it looks like something's going on up here, but I'm going to just stick in the inside and just see if we can coast past and pretend that we weren't in the wrong lane to start with. As you can see here, we've got a number of workshop modifications. We've got, of course, the normal ones like the actual normal truck skins. We've got the Coca-Cola one in front, we've got the Amazon one in front of us just here as well. But we've also got some really nice new ones as well, like the Cascadia ones, as is just mentioned, with the sun visors and all the interior mods just here as well. As always, all my workshop modifications will be linked to my Steam workshop page, which I'll leave in the video description as well. I'm also really pleased to say that we actually have a new sponsor on board as well to the channel. I'm now a Tobii ambassador. Of course, the Pimax Super has incredible Tobii eye tracking already built in, but I do actually like to also play Euro Truck Simulator 2 actually on the flat screen, so some new future videos for 2026 will include the Tobii eye tracker, and we'll be doing some flat screen videos and some modding guides as well due to popular demand. But back onto virtual reality again for one moment. We're getting around 80 FPS as mentioned on the actual 57 ppd. On the Pimax Super 50 ppd and ultra wide we're looking around 60 FPS, so there is obviously a significant performance impact by having a wider field of view in there. The 57 ppd is an interesting one because despite the fact we have a narrower field of view, it is actually my preferred optical engine to play American Truck Simulator and Euro Truck Simulator 2 in. It's got some real special attributes, this optical engine, that I think many other YouTube reviewers have perhaps overlooked, so it has some special use cases. But one of the best use cases I can give you an example of is the incredible performance uplifts that you are getting in Euro Truck Simulator 2 and American Truck Simulator as well. I'm just going to have to pull in for some fuel here because we're running out of fuel because I forgot to fill it before I set off. But you know, this is amazing. It's absolutely fantastic, and I've been playing this game, as I say, for a number of years. We've got this amazing rainbow over there, and some of these effects and some of these graphical features that we now have in this are just becoming just absolutely crazy. They really are. So I've also got my button box here, so I'm going to turn the engine off and we're going to fill up, and we're just going to sit and just discuss a few more things here. So I don't know if you can see that in the distance there, we've got that beautiful rainbow. We've also got the high texture modifications running on here as well, so we've got the actual high resolution trees, as hopefully you can see in the distance just there, and we've also got the actual high resolution textures of grass, and again these are modifications that you can get for free from a workshop. SCS are not keen on paid modifications, so it's understandable in the respect that some modifications do exceed the actual cost of the game. So it's completely conceivable as to why SCS are not too happy about having those featured in the videos, but of course it's completely up to the user as to what they want to do and obviously what they want to purchase. These are well-known modifications and are almost prerequisites in this particular game.
Then turn left.
But the other thing as well is that we are also recording this using OpenXR plugin on OBS, and of course it's required to capture this game because it actually, the way this game renders is quite unique, but that normally has quite a significant performance impact actually on ATS and ETS2. And again, there have been some under the skin improvements to 1.57, I'm pretty certain of that. We've also mentioned those in previous guides as to what we've been building up to. Now this is becoming native on the consoles. I'm pretty sure that obviously a lot of those features have been implemented within the actual core game as well, and have migrated across to make the experience actually better within the core game that we're playing here. And that's it. Happy virtual trucking. I hope this guide helps you get the best VR experience you've ever had in ATS or ETS2. And if you've got any questions, drop them in the comments. I reply to as many as I can. I also have a dedicated ATS and ETS2 section on my Discord if you want help from a community. Thank you for watching, thank you for the likes and subscribes, and check out these other videos right here and here for more Pimax and VR related content. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.